How do you define, develop, and execute your legacy when you are a leader who wields power? And how do you wield it honorably? Good morning. My name is Angelina Carleton. I'm the founder of Legacy Planning and the hostess of the Design Your Legacy podcast. This morning, I have the pleasure and the honor to introduce Marc Azoulay. He is a psychotherapist in private practice in Boulder, Colorado, and the current president of the Four Corners Group Psychotherapy Society. He helps clients that have a harmful relationship to their inherent aggression or who are stuck in their pain of repetitive compulsions. Welcome, Marc.
Hey, happy to be here.
Yes, thank you for joining me from Colorado on this lovely Friday.
Yeah, it's great. It's great.
Yes. Is there anything that I left out about your background that you would like to add to for the listener or the viewer who's tuning in?
Oh, I think you covered it, right? I'm a psychotherapist in Boulder. I work a lot with leaders, either CEOs or people that are high up in the corporate ladder. And I work mainly with men. And I'm excited to share what I know here on this podcast with you.
Yes, and I love it that you're a millennial.
I am a millennial. Yes.
Yes, and you have a wonderful deep journey, which we may or may not get into, but I feel like you are wise beyond your years regarding the depth of knowledge that you bring.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
Okay, so given that you've had a journey of your own in doing the inner work, what would you like your legacy to be? And we're just going to start there.
Dive right into it. Yeah, so a big part of my work, I'll give some quick bullet points and we can go into it more if you want, is essentially I'm in recovery from drug abuse. I've been sober for about 10 years, had a kind of rough childhood, abusive. And over time, I had to really rediscover who I was, get over social anxiety, get over suicidality, get over really wanting to not exist and be small on the planet, and step up and have a legacy, really have impact in the world. Because for the beginning, first half of my life, I didn't think I was going to amount to much of anything. And really changing that through a lot of therapy, through a lot of intensive practice, meditation practice was a big one for me as well. That has helped me to even think about having a legacy. So a big part of what I want my legacy to be right now is letting people know that they can get better. I think it's probably a big one, right? That there is a lot of opportunity out there, that there is a lot of opportunity for growth, but it does require going inwards and feeling through a lot of the kind of painful parts of our experience in our childhood. I really do believe that kids are born essentially a blank slate. And by kind of understanding how we're programmed, how we're designed, we can then create any kind of opportunity and any kind of person in the future moving forward.
That's wonderful. So if you could say in one sentence what you would like your legacy to be, what would that one sentence be?
My one sense would be to, I'd say, increase the emotional intelligence of leaders and
Mm,
train them to wield power honorably.
yes, yes. And I know that's one of the intentions we set for this podcast episode.
Mhm.
Yes. Very cool. And what I know this isn't on the list of questions, but what values would you say that you get to honor in increasing the emotional intelligence both of yourself as well as the leaders that you get to work with?
Yeah, so I got four that I really go through, which are strength, courage, honor, and mastery. And a lot of it, I guess, for this topic in particular, I think it really boils down to strength and courage, which is the idea of having emotional strength, right? It's not just like physical strength, how much you can bench press or how much you can run. The ability to tolerate and be with emotional intensity, which a lot of leaders struggle with, right? Like, how do you deal with, profits going down? How do you deal with firing somebody? How do you deal with workplace drama? Oftentimes leaders, if they're not trained, can make it worse, right? Their personal self gets triggered and they end up lashing out or acting out in a way that can be harmful to the organization. So there's that. And then courage is kind of very similar, which is feeling fear and doing it anyway, right? It's not about not having any fear. It's about feeling fear and stepping into those critical conversations to, putting yourself out there if you feel like you have imposter syndrome, or, raising your hand for that promotion or advocating for yourself. There's so many ways to be courageous as a leader. So I think those would be the two main ones that kind of are relevant to the mission.
Yeah, and that's how very honest leaders do develop because of those challenges, but only by their own choosing. And I know one of the things that you have mentioned in your other previous podcast is sometimes leaders get demonized, but we don't realize the path that they have to walk, and it can be a very lonely path because, yeah, they're getting squeezed from many different angles, especially if they don't want to take the heat that's in the kitchen that comes with that title and the role.
Yeah, it's incredibly lonely. I'm sure you've interviewed a lot of leaders for this podcast, and I know you definitely work with a ton. And the overwhelming thing is loneliness because, again, to wield power honorably, there does have to be that disconnection between an employer and an employee, for instance. They're not your friends, right? They're not your
Yeah.
community. And the leaders that kind of succumb to loneliness and make their workplace their family, right? Or their friends, that creates even more problems, right? All the personal dynamics come up, all the jealousy, the envy, the politics, like that's when it becomes a very toxic workplace. So to be an effective leader, you kind of have to be alone in a lot of ways. And
And be strong
um,
with that.
be strong with that, right? And
Yeah.
find other leaders that you can talk to. But there is this crippling loneliness because a good leader looks effortless, you know? Like a good leader looks like they got everything under control, but they might be crying in their office or they might be, feeling a lot of terror. They're holding those intense emotions for their team. That's part of the job.
Yeah. 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 I think they call it the poker face.
Yes, big time.
Yeah. Yeah. So no one can read them. So, given that you've worked with many individuals facing anxiety as well as addiction, whether
Mhm.
it's their role as an executive or an entrepreneur, um, what is the emotional cost that sometimes come up if they're unwilling to do this inner work?
Yeah, so if they don't do the work, usually it's collapse, quite frankly, right? Usually it gets acted out. So if it's an addiction, it could lead to a big relapse or just a big use, kind of self-sabotage behavior that can look like, coming drunk to work or doing drugs at work or, buying drugs from a coworker, right? Something that's like a completely inappropriate that ends up kind of getting them fired, or having them kind of begin this tumble down. If it's anxiety, it often I've worked mainly with men. So for a lot of men, we turn our anxiety into anger and rage, which is not a great thing to do. So a lot of anxious male leaders will yell at their employees or they will get very upset at their family, right? They won't know how to deal with that anxiety, which is fear, right? They don't know how to deal with the fear and it just comes out as rage and anger and aggression. So we want to avoid those outcomes.
Yeah, very much so, very much so. Well, that's wonderful. And I know some of the other emotional costs you've talked about is if they have to choose a decision, like do they sell something that they don't believe in, and or is there micro betrayal of values? All those tiny distinctions that we don't see from the outside because we don't walk a mile in their shoes.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, one of those other pillars I talked about, honor, it really boils down to ethics. And I bring up a lot of like ancient Greek and Roman philosophy, some Eastern, spiritualism. And the idea of ethics are really powerful because they get challenged, right? It's one thing to like write down your values and your mission statement also, which is very helpful, but it's not real until it gets challenged. And a leader, we talk about power, right? A leader with more power, whether it's power to lead a team of people working underneath them or in a structure, or to have impact in the world, it's another type of power, or to be a speaker and to be a knowledge leader, content expert. Those are all different ways to have power. The more power you get, the more your ethics are going to be tested. And it's something that is often invisible, to someone that is just starting out in their career. They're not aware of all those challenges.
Yeah, the universities and colleges sometimes forget about that playbook. This is the other part we need to tell you about, the blind spots.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, and we're going to talk about mentors in a moment, but I think that's why advisory councils, coaches, therapists, mentors are incredibly important because very few people can just do it alone and have the answers. Um, yeah, yeah. I know one of the things you've joked about is it's good. It's a good time to work on this stuff when you're not in the insane moment.
Yeah, we talked about that in our first conversation. So, yeah, most people come to me because I'm a therapist and I'm looking at moving more into the realm of coaching because of this reason. So I'll put a little asterisk there. But as a therapist, right, people come to me, especially again, men, when their life is in shambles, right? A big one is post-divorce is probably the number one reason men come to therapy. Another one is, on behest of usually their partner or their mom, right? There's like a big anger outburst. Maybe there's like a domestic violence incident or something that very nearly, is close to that. Maybe they get fired from a big job. Like there's often some like catastrophe that happens to have like a guy pick up the phone and go to therapy,
And
which
reach out.
and reach out, right? And
Yeah.
actually ask for help because as men, we're really taught not to ask for help. We're taught that that makes you weak. We're taught that that makes you vulnerable. Someone could take advantage of you. We're taught that like we have to be totally self-sufficient and there's a personal failing if we do ask for help rather. So it usually takes a guy to be like at a rock bottom to call me. So the first, and I work with my clients long term, the first couple years are often like, okay, cool. How do we like put your pieces back together? How do we like, pick up this mess? How do we figure out like how you got here and untie this knot? I call that kind of they're in insanity, right? They're insane. It's like the worst moment of their life. And then they get to sanity, and then you
Well, it's
can
because
work on
they're in that
reacting.
reactionary mode.
Absolutely. Yeah. They're
Yeah,
like
yeah.
totally stressed out. They're flushed full of like, cortisol. They're like full of adrenaline. They're freaking out, right? Their life is in shambles.
Marc, I need
Like,
you to fix this now.
right, exactly. Like, I'm bleeding out here. Like, help me. Um, and that's like, it's good. I'm happy to help people in that space. I do find it's more effective, and it's something a message I want to give out to men that I work with, but I think anybody really is like be really proactive about this work, especially if you do want to succeed in your career or in your life or as a mother or father, anything, right? Like doing this work can help you to be proactive and come into it better prepared. And it's a lot easier if your life isn't in crisis.
Yeah, it's interesting. We know we should prepare, but we rarely don't until life slaps us in the face, and then we go, "Oh, I guess I better deal with all these things I haven't dealt with before."
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's some of that human nature stuff. I think a lot of that is Western culture mentality. If you look at other cultures, it's not as intense, but it is a very American thing that like we need to have the quadruple bypass before we stop eating hamburgers, kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah. I know that your website has kind of a key slogan there, something along the lines of facing your demons.
Mhm.
Yeah. What would you say is the number one demon that you see executives, entrepreneurs, founders, and so forth facing today?
It's a great question. Pain and insecurity. A lot of people that you think would be very confident are super insecure. They often felt invisible growing up. They often felt like they were never good enough. There's a huge amount of imposter syndrome there, especially when I look at my CEOs and founders that tend to be more millennials. A lot of them, because, and this is not their fault, they haven't done psychological work. So a lot of that drive to like get out and like pitch, right? Or to like have an idea to change the world often comes from hurt. It's kind of like a dark side mentality, right? An unmet need as a child of like, I don't want anyone to feel how I felt as a kid, right?
Sure.
Or like a craving for like fame or power or
To be
money or
seen.
security to be seen, right? To
Yeah.
like be on a stage and have everyone applaud them. A lot of that comes from kind of darkness.
Or that
And
deep void unfulfilled.
exactly. And that's the demon, right?
Mm.
And I'm not a totally positive psychology therapist. Like I think that that darkness can be helpful in those early stages because that's what a lot of people have to work on. But then there comes the work of like, okay, let's go understand, face that demon, nurture it, learn how to be a different person.
So it
And
doesn't
that makes
control
us
them.
even more powerful, right? Because then it's not coming from those kind of personal ties.
Yeah. Good stuff. Yeah. And I bet a lot of people may not give voice to that because they're not even conscious of it yet.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
they're not often conscious of it. That's why therapy or coaching is very helpful. But if you're listening and you're in this category, what you might notice is hyper anxiety around a big talk, right? Perfectionism is a big one.
Ooh, perfectionism.
Procrastination is a big one, right?
Yeah.
Really struggling taking any kind of feedback, right? Feeling like criticized, judged, um, fear of getting like kicked out. That's one of the questions you want to ask me later, but I think it
Rejected.
weaves in here. Is a
Yeah.
saying that I use a lot is, if it's hysterical, it's historical.
Oh,
So it's like
yeah.
if you find yourself having like a hysterical, like an intense, super emotional reaction to something that like shouldn't be that big a deal, there's often like a historical root, a historical trauma that's getting triggered there.
Yeah. I think that that's very honest as it relates to the nervous system and also just the deep well of it. It didn't come from, out of the blue.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like a crack in the road that leads all the way down to a giant cave. It
Yes.
might look like just a little crack, but you step on it just the right way, and people can get really spun out. I know. I mean, I have when I was doing this work.
Yeah. It's interesting how much people need to be seen, heard, and understood. And yet when we go into the workplace, how that sometimes doesn't happen if it's not built into the culture.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
people feel interchangeable, right? Or they feel like that their job doesn't matter. They're just like a cog in the machine.
Yeah, especially because yeah, businesses sometimes are looking at the profits and they forget about the people, but that's another subject for another day. So, in developing your legacy as a millennial, you lean into mentors and you also design your own counsel, which is very cool.
Yeah, so this is something that
Yeah.
I did in my recovery journey. So there's
Okay.
something that I'd say it's another asterisk because it is good, but anyway. So in the AA community, right, Alcohol Anonymous community, they have this thing where they say like you have to be powerless, right? Step one is admit powerlessness, and the undercurrent of that is like you really can't trust yourself because yourself is an addict. Now that's like very shame based, and I don't fully believe that now, so I have like an asterisk there.
Okay. Okay.
But that idea, I think the way that I've synthesized it is being like, I need to find a council of people that I can go to my decisions, right?
Yeah. And it's very good
Well,
you get that feedback.
right, because
Yeah.
sometimes I can't trust my feelings, right? Not most time I can trust myself, but sometimes, especially if it's really intense, I can't trust what I'm doing and what I'm feeling.
Yeah. Can I tell you why I think that's so wise?
Yeah, I'd love
Yeah,
to.
because I think one of the things that trips up a lot of coaches and maybe therapists also is self-management, not letting one's biases get in the way.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's exactly it, right? Like my biases can get in the way. Fear can be speaking and making me do things that I don't really want to do in the long term. I'm obviously still human, right? So like I can have these kind of base desires or these animal instincts that get in the way. And oftentimes, especially with stuff that's very close to me, I have a lot of blind spots, just like you said, and biases and assumptions. So I've worked hard to really create like an inner circle, and something that I do, which I kind of find fun now, is to find people with very different perspectives. So I have a really good friend who's like a scientist and really brings a lot of like cold, oh, sometimes like very cold rationality to it, right? I
Pure
have one
logic.
pure logic, right? And then on the other side, I have one friend who is like a yoga teacher and a astrologist and is very like sensual person, right? It brings a lot of like feeling and spirituality and
The
find the
intuitive.
connections exactly, right? And that kind of thing in there. I have like my therapist who is doing kind of what I do at a higher level, who is in his 60s, who's older, who's walked the path before, so he kind of has that old school wisdom that I need. I have another friend who is like a big sister to me that's very protective, and like she can be very aggressive in like a guard doggy way, which is I need that sometimes, right? To be like, you tell them to get out of here, right? Like things like that. So I can keep going, but I try to bring in people that come from many different perspectives. And if I go to them with the same problem and they all say the same thing, I'm like, okay, I should probably do that thing. I should probably
Yeah.
do like what they're saying.
And I think that is brilliant because it's going to set you up for success because that feedback is just gold. And it takes, I think, a good bit of humility to ask. Some people don't ask.
Right. Like I think most people don't ask, and most people don't accept the answer.
Oh,
Uh,
yeah, there's some truth in that.
yeah. Yeah, and like the nearest thing that I worked with this council recently was finding a girlfriend, right?
Okay.
So like I would go to them with, I mean, now I'm dating someone, it's been a year and it's been fantastic. But before then, I would tell them who I was dating, show them the pictures, give them the rundown, give them whatever. They would each do their own method, whether it's like astrology or science or whatever, soul reading their eyes, meeting them in person, and
Natal
there are
star
people,
charts.
yeah, exactly, right. Like I mean, whatever it is, and even people that I felt yes on, everyone was telling me no, and turns out they were right. Like it was someone that wasn't a good match, right?
Well, because they're going to see things that you're not going to see.
Absolutely, they're gonna see all those blind spots there.
Yeah, I
Um,
think a part of it is that when we come up against a decision, we sometimes want to see what we want the outcome to be and to meet our needs compared to sometimes what's actually there. And that's another humbling thing.
that's the real humbling thing, yeah. Whether it be in
But
a
I wanted to
relationship or
manifest it. Go
a
ahead.
business. Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the thing. Yeah, like manifesting is helpful because it lets you kind of see things and focus, but then there's a lot of hard work and then there's also like a lot of practicality. Um, so yeah, I mean, the thing I'm working with my council now is I have some new business ideas, so I want to run it past all of them, right, and see, and they're each going to critique it and support it in different ways, and that makes the idea stronger when it's ready to launch out the gate.
Yeah, very cool. Very honest. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah,
Because yeah, I know also one of the things you've shared is number of the clients that you work with and you work with men. It's also encouraging them to step outside of the box and also date more, create deeper relationships. It can't just be all work and no balance.
yeah, it's something that every time I get to this point in a podcast, I'm like, I need to research this exact number but there is a number that is awful, which is the amount of friends that males say that they have, I think it's literally something like 2 or 3 when they get plus 40,
Oh,
right? And they often
interesting.
say that those friends are at their workplace. Very few men have close friends when they get into that kind of middle age part of their life, and they don't have emotional connection at all or emotional
Wow.
depth at all. And they don't reach out for help, right? And their friends that they do have, and this again, this is nothing wrong with this. How males bond is we bond over things. So like you
Oh,
can be like, oh yeah, this is like my dirt biking buddy, right? Or this is my golf friend, or this is my like we do boats together, right?
yeah,
But
yeah.
there isn't like anything deeper than that from the emotional air, realm, and we often don't know about each other. We don't give each other feedback. So I think it does take something like a men's group, or therapy
To
to
be
really be like,
vulnerable.
this is where you do the emotional work. Because men are also we're very compartmentalized. We're like, okay, we do emotions in this room, and then we like do golf on the field or whatever it is, right? Or we work out at the gym. We like having boxes for things, whereas women, at least in my experience, tend to be a lot more relational and a lot more interested in each other, quite frankly, and like really wanting to know and understand each other on that emotional level.
Yeah. Very cool. Very cool. Well, I'm glad you're leading the way and shining a light. And I think, for instance, like Los Angeles is the highest number of single people.
Yeah.
So for a city of all that beauty and fitness, you would think, otherwise. But anyways, moving along. So in developing one's legacy, you talk about the distinction between a personal and a business mission statement. So why is it valuable to differentiate them? And I actually really like that you do separate them. So do tell.
Yeah. So I think it's something, a couple of reasons. One, having them separate insulates the identity from failure. With a lot of the leaders that I work with, their business mission, their life becomes their business. And there is business, ups and downs. And without going too much into it, looks like we're looking at a down coming in the near future here,
The economy, do you mean?
Yeah, the economy, right?
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
and funding. And a lot of my, startup individuals are struggling getting investors, which is something that really wasn't true before the pandemic. And it's looking a little dire, right? And if that person, for instance, is over identified with their company, if the company doesn't meet the next milestone or has to let people go or whatever, doesn't have the full impact of what a vision statement is, that person can really spiral out and crumble. So
And
I
their
think that's
identity,
that's
yeah.
important.
Yeah.
And I think also for men, we don't think about our personal life. We're not told to do that,
Oh,
right?
you're
We're
just supposed to hunt the deer and kill
hunt
the
the
deer.
deer.
Yeah.
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
Like do the thing, get the money, right? Like have an attractive wife, maybe have a couple kids, live somewhere cool, right? But there's like not much more depth after that of
We need to tell
like
the advertisers they need a new message. Go ahead.
right, yeah, right. Like this idea of like, what do you want your gravestone to say, right? Like, what do you
Yeah.
want? What impact do you want on the world? Like, do you? A lot of men struggle to even appreciate beauty, whether that be like art or music or theater, let alone express themselves, have a creative art or craft or something, right? I really help my guys develop that because I think it's so critical to that personal mission statement of self-expression is really critical around that.
Yeah, it's interesting because even with family businesses, many times if the senior generation sells, they pass the baton, et cetera, they recruit and retain non-family members. If that thing, that baby, their business was their identity, and now you've separated them from it, it's kind of like, well, now who do they get to be? So I think it's very valuable that you're developing this, and I agree with it also in my practice that to develop that personal mission statement because you still get to be someone outside of your work. But in our culture, it's that conversation and that encouragement isn't always there, and it needs to be.
Totally. Yeah. And
Yeah.
I think for the people out there that are very success driven, I get it. I am too. It takes a leap of faith, but having a personal life helps you be better at business because not only do you have a way to recharge so you can work harder, but also lets you be creative and get out of the rut and actually innovate and disrupt your field. Right? If you have something like painting as another activity, different parts of the brain work. And oftentimes, my guys that have these creative outlets, art, music, whatever it is, writing, they have their best business ideas when they are in more of that personal realm because their brain can give them some more of that genius that's in there, that's in everybody.
Yeah, there's all the different parts of the brain. It's not junk DNA.
Right,
But
exactly.
bump.
Yeah.
That's great. And I just wanted to add to that, that I think it also gives them something to fall back on. Like you said, if their business isn't doing well, and then they ask themselves the question of like, well, who am I outside of my work? And there needs to be an answer there. Because
Yeah.
if there's not, then it's like the black abyss.
And then that's when people get desperate. That's when people start to cross their own boundaries. Is when people start to violate their own ethics because
Mhm.
their business feels like life and death. And
Yeah,
when stuff feels like life and death, people do really dumb stuff.
because they're operating out of fear and out of the void. And yeah, okay, very
Exactly.
cool. Well, not that part, but that you're developing personal mission statements with your clients, so at least they can explore that. And even if they just have it in their planner, they frame it on their wall, they at least know it. It's just, it adds to, I think, the depth of who they are as a human being, as well as their personal development.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, a practice that I do that, maybe some of your listeners can do, and again, I have to acknowledge that there's a lot of privilege of being a business owner. I can do this, but every winter, I'm born January 5th, between Christmas and my birthday, I take that week off, right, between the 25th and the 5th, and I go to a cabin middle of nowhere. I live in Colorado. I go to the middle of the mountains, get snowed in, essentially, and I choose places specifically that don't have Wi-Fi. So I go somewhere with no internet, limited cell phone connection, and I just review. I just think, I meditate a lot, I do some snowshoeing, but really I just disconnect from all the noise. I do like a digital detox. And in that, I take inventory of every aspect of my life, whether it be, health and fitness, relationships and love, spirituality, business mission statement, right, personal mission statement, all these things, mental health, emotional health. And I just really, I write, I speak, I do art, I do everything around that to really synthesize these different aspects of my life. And it's something that can sound really intense and scary to people because I'm also entirely alone. But
And
if
some people
anyone,
are afraid to be alone. Keep going.
people hate being alone, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, if you're willing to do that, taking the time to disconnect and get into that strategic way of thinking, right? Kind of get that bird's eye view of your life is so powerful. Because some people are just in it. They're just in the what I would call a tactical, right? Then the day-to-day kind of like missions rather than the strategic, seeing the whole battlefield at one time. You can tell
Yeah.
I work with guys because it's all like war metaphors, right? But it's
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
the idea
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
kind of like seeing more out there
Well,
and really,
commerce can be like war.
for sure.
Yeah, yeah. I think Henry David Thoreau and
Mhm.
Emerson went out to the woods, Walden Woods, and I think even good old Yeshua would go alone to quiet places.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Like retreats have been incredibly powerful for me. I've done them for 6 years, and I plan to never stop.
yeah. Well, good for you for developing that, because one of the things that you're probably aware of is as a coach develops, we can then guide our clients further. But if we don't do the work, we can't guide our clients anywhere.
I know if we don't do the work, our clients get stuck where we are. Right? They
Yeah,
get as far as we
yeah.
are, and then they get stuck there.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the metaphor I use, and you might like this because it's woodsy, is
Mhm.
coaches and therapists, they get to be guides that walk the clients through the forest to the canoe by the lake to say, watch out for the poison ivy and the rocks over there, etc. But yeah, if we can't walk that path, we can't point out the poison ivy and the poison oak, etc.
Right. Then we're
Yeah.
gonna end it together, and we're just gonna
Yeah.
be it. Not a great look.
Yeah, that's no bueno. Okay, very cool. So also in developing one's legacy, life skills are important. And I know you've talked about men face the hierarchy of power, whereas women today, I didn't know this, but they face body image.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I'm going to have you speak on that in a moment. But I found that so interesting. Um, but when I was growing up, my dad said to me, "Here's a bicycle and a library card. Your looks are going to fade. Good luck." And I was told to read
Ooh,
books.
yeah.
Yeah, but
How did
but
you take that? I mean, was that like encouraging or was that dismissive? Like, what was it like to hear that?
I think he was just being practical. Yeah, he was a career Air Force officer. And
Mhm.
so he just said, here's a bicycle. And he would send me to outward bound camps and he wanted me to toughen up. And I think he was doing me a favor. But yeah, and I was not allowed to have long hair because he was like, your looks are going to fade. And even to this day, it's,
That's something. Yeah.
but I do realize when I look out at young ladies these days, I see that and I go, oh, you're worth so much more than what you look like.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
I
I
mean,
didn't realize the hours they spend in a bathroom, dolling themselves up. So would you talk about that for a moment? And then we'll get into the three most important life skills.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. So I do work with a handful of women. Like I said, it's predominantly men, but I work with a handful of women. And something that I hear a ton from them is this idea of attractiveness. And it's something that's not talked about in the conversation right now, which is beauty privilege, right? Is that beauty gets people, opens up certain doors, and not being beautiful closes a lot of doors, whether that be physical attractance, whether that be weight. And that's something that, again, from the women I talk to, they are hyper aware of all the time. There's a lot of competition, a lot of comparison, a lot of, like you said, hours of maintenance, hundreds of dollars, not $1,000 a product. It's crazy, right? It's crazy how much that works. And a lot of the women that I work with tend to be attractive and successful. And something that I guess I can share is that they often doubt that they got where they're at if it wasn't for their beauty, right? And there's all kinds of awful, oppressive things that happen in the workplace where people say, oh, well, she's only there because she's pretty, or she's only there because she slept with the manager or slept with the boss, right? Or like the boss likes having her around, like, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, right? Like just kind
Use
of
a
like,
personal mission statement
yeah,
framed on her wall or in the cubicle. Go ahead.
yeah, but like it just real like misogynistic, chauvinistic things that happen. I'd like to believe that there are some advances being made, but in some industries, it's still incredibly prevalent.
And you
And
also, I'm going to interrupt you for a second. You also work with toxic masculinity in terms of healing, overcoming that.
yeah, that's the example of it, right? Because those guys that say that are often have some form of misogyny, which comes from hurt from women, right? Like, or perceived hurt from women is probably more accurate, right? Mistrust of mother, bad breakups, all this shadow stuff, demons, right? That has never been processed. So it comes out as misogyny and hatred and chauvinism. And what that guy is feeling is insecure, feeling afraid, feeling threatened, right? And because they can't acknowledge that, because they're not acting in courage, right? They're acting in cowardice. It
Mhm.
comes across as very hurtful, and sometimes it even is applauded of like, oh yeah, good joke, got her, and that's not great. That's something that needs a lot of work in many different workplaces, I believe.
Yeah. And so tell me about for a moment the hierarchy with men and power. So again, I'm not a man, so I didn't realize that. I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah, so men, so yeah, if you're a woman and you're relating to, how much time and effort you spend with beauty and that kind of competition, right? In comparison, men do that with hierarchies, right? And hierarchies being these many different, it's very linear, right? So it's like how strong are you? How much money do you make? Where do you live? What car do you drive, right? Like guys are comparing on this like very like direct hierarchy around where you stack up in the totem pole. And what's interesting is, a man that actually isn't toxic masculinity is okay with where they stay in the totem pole, right? So if you look at something like you mentioned that you're from like a military family, right? If you look at like military, right, the best armies in the world are incredibly hierarchical, but there's
Mm.
like mutual respect and understanding of all the different pieces, and the guys know where they are, they know who their commanders are, and they work as a team and a unit, right? Organizations are very similar. If there's mutual respect, you can be lower on the hierarchy but still feel seen, valued, heard, and feel like you're a critical part of the mission. When that person is insecure, or they always want to be, striving, or they, you know, don't like, they're not able to accept their limits or accept that they might be imperfect, then that's where the acting out comes. That's where the politics, the backstabbing, all those awful workplace dynamics, the gossip, right? All that stuff comes up is because they're not okay with the hierarchy, you know.
So
Um,
so are you saying that they're overcompensating then?
Yes, they're often overcompensating, and they're often unwilling to work on what's really critical. So, for instance, this happens all the time with corporate clients I work with, right? A guy comes to me and he's like, you know what? I should have my boss's job. I can do X, Y, and Z better, right? Like, I don't know why I'm not getting promoted. This person sucks, and here's all the reasons that they suck. And they spend so much energy getting angry at their boss and envious and jealous and afraid, kind of insecure. But what they should be working on, which is a lot harder, is acknowledging, hey, there's probably reasons why you're not promoted. Maybe you're not that great relationally, right? Maybe you're just like kind of annoying to be around, or you're really negative, or you really struggle with dealing with difficult conversations, right? Or there's an aggression problem, and those things are harder for somebody to really admit and work on. So the hierarchy, I want to be really clear, is not static, right? People can move up and down it all the time, but it means working on those things that a guy might be more insecure about. right? But instead of that, they project the anger outwards instead of doing the internal work to be like, okay, what do I actually need to move up here? If I really want to move up, maybe I should learn how to be nicer to my female colleagues, right? Maybe I should learn how to like not have anger explosions at work. Maybe I should quit this gossiping thing that I'm doing. But that's harder. That means taking personal responsibility.
Yeah. So what would you say are the three top life skills?
That people need. Yeah. So I think let's rattle it off here. I think number one, I don't know if it's number one. One of the top three is time management, big time. Time management, scheduling, organization. I use a system called Getting Things Done by David Allen that's used in a lot of coaching things, and it's actually what Agile was kind of based off of. Um, so learning a way to self-organize, calendar, note scheduling, really critical. Super, like anyone that is a high achiever takes notes, right, and finds a way to synthesize notes and synthesize information, especially in the newer jobs where it's all about finding patterns and a lot of data. Being able to organize yourself is critical. So that's a big one. I think another one is tolerating emotional intensity and being able to regulate. So a good leader can have very difficult conversations. Um, Tim Ferriss, who I'm sure you and your listeners have heard of, right, has a great quote where he says, like, I measure my life success by the number of difficult conversations that I can have, right? Um,
That's deep.
right? Like
Yeah,
that's
because
the
most
thing.
people don't want to get their hands dirty in the messy and the complex.
They don't want to go there at all, right? They want like a good or evil story, right? They want like to know that they're right and that person's wrong and they're bad.
Yeah, the
They
villain
want
and the hero, and they
right.
get to be addicted to being right. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, which is fun in like, Marvel movies and Star Wars, but like that's not how the world works.
Right.
Everything is
Yeah.
very complicated. So there's that, right? I think people often don't want to take accountability for their own blind spots and where they have hurt people. That's a big one. And a lot of people are very avoidant and they're like, oh, I'm just not going to talk about it and it's going to resolve itself or it's going to go away. And that never happens. It often just gets worse.
And we
So
talked about that before, kicking the can down the road.
exactly. Kicking the can down the
Yeah.
road is procrastinating and then it blows up later. So being able to have difficult conversations is definitely a big one. Um, and then I think the last one would be mindfulness and authenticity. So mindfulness is the ability to know what you're feeling and notice what's actually happening. And then authenticity is being able to express that in a way that is understandable to other people. I think what you were talking about earlier of not living in fantasy and not living in a kind of a made up world.
Yeah. Well, reality is it can make somebody feel very alive, but they have to trust themselves that it's better than the escape, or it's better than the distraction, or it's better than settling.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it often means accepting hard truths, right? And for a lot of people, it means accepting limitations, of like, well, I'm not this grandiose fantasy. I have, these are things I actually have to really work on.
Or the person is flawed, but it's still okay.
Right.
Yeah. There's sometimes this illusion that somebody has to be perfect to be accepted.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then people spend so much time covering up their flaws rather than acknowledging them and actually putting some kind of work into them. Right. I mean, that's
Working
like,
through them. Yeah.
working
Yeah.
through
Yeah.
them. Right. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the thing is so much energy goes to the front and the facade and doesn't go to the actual true self.
Yeah. So you have spoken into the loneliness that leaders face. So on one hand, they may be building and executing the foundation of their life's legacy because of their work and that aspect, that portion of their how they'll be remembered. But then they also face living in what I might call the narrow bubble or a small narrow world. So what can help, from their environment to their habit formation, so there isn't this hidden emotional toll of living in this very tight bubble?
Mhm. Yeah. So the biggest thing, and I'm a little biased being a therapist, right, would be going to other people. I think relationships are the big thing, whether it be a therapist or a coach, whether it be like something like a mastermind group or a group of leaders, something that is outside of your organization or your family or your world that doesn't have an agenda. A lot of people may have, they work in a corporation, they may have a lot of people in their world because they're part of these groups, but there's often this element of unsafety because everybody is competing against each other, right? So joining a mastermind group or joining some kind of online kind of brainstorming or improvement group can be really helpful for people because they're able to break out of that bubble a little bit and be with people that are investing in them rather
Mm,
than trying to subtly compete with them, right?
yeah.
There's no dual relationships. There's no conflicting interest there.
Yeah. And it also, I think, shines a light that they are more than their results in the work sphere.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
And
it's really interesting. I run men's groups, right? And it's like you have people that are very successful, and they'll come in and they'll be like, "Oh, I like did this at work, and I made this much money, and like, can you believe this new product that we're launching?" And my guys that have been there for a while are like, "Cool, but like, how's your relationship with your wife?" Right? Like they just dismiss all of that, and they get
they
to
cut to
like
the
what's
chase.
actually going on, right?
Yeah. Yeah. They're not going to buy the answer of new sports and weather.
Right. Like that's not as interesting, right? Because having someone that sees you when you're not in the role means that they can see you a lot more clearer, right? That a lot of that
Yeah.
power stuff is taken offline.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, it was fascinating to in preparation of for this podcast episode when I listened to three of your prior ones and realizing how much goes on in nonverbals and judging one another and sizing one another up and yeah.
Yeah, there's so much of that. I mean, if I could ask you the question, it's like, do you do that? I know I do that, right? I'm always looking for those kind of status markers or looking for something.
I think to answer that question honestly, I think in some ways I grew up in a bubble because I was at the library.
You're at the library reading books,
For the
right?
bicycle, right? Yeah, and I wasn't allowed to play video games. I wasn't allowed to watch television, and I was not allowed to eat fast food, which I'm thankful about today. But I think that after I graduated from college, then it was kind of like, okay, now I have to learn about the real world. And there was no white paper, there was no memo, there was no cliff notes. And then it was kind of like, oh, okay.
Yeah, fair. Yeah, I mean, I've seen there's a lot of comparison and judgment that people have all the time, and a lot of projection. I mean, you talked about
Yeah.
fantasy before, and oftentimes, and gets into kind of the more psychoanalysis stuff that I do, that we project our family or we project our early life experience onto other people without giving them a chance. Right. So, for instance, you go back to the misogyny thing, which comes up a lot, right? If somebody who grew up with a difficult mother and there's a lot of pain there, they see a woman that is maybe of similar age, similar look, maybe like has a similar tone of voice. They're like, oh, that's my mom. Like, what a bitch. I hate her. Right. Like, she's the
Mhm.
worst. And not give that person a chance. Right. And this is how the human brain works, is that we're always looking for patterns and we're always looking for similarity. So if those demons aren't faced, we're gonna like project our world around us and live in this real fantasy where people are not who they actually are, and that can be really creepy for some people to
And
to realize.
and destructive.
Super destructive, yeah,
Yeah.
because they're interacting with a idea of somebody, not with the actual person. So everything's going to be misattuned.
Yeah. So speaking about those demons that they're trying to fill, I have to wonder if a part of them is trying to find resolution, but it's with a stranger.
Yeah,
And the
absolutely,
stranger's like, I don't know you.
absolutely, absolutely, yes.
Yeah. But I feel like if you're talking about leaders today, it's almost like if the stranger doesn't have the empathy or compassion to know how to maybe just deal with it that moment in resolving it and de-escalating it, then it could be that thing that could take him down and it's not even their junk.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that can happen all the time, is that leaders especially can get recruited to play out parental roles because it's just another authority figure. So oftentimes an employee might be doing something that is just like whack, right? That's just like really crazy. But if you can understand their childhood trauma, you can understand where that is coming from,
Yeah.
right? And a lot of employees under stress or under pressure will do things that are, quote, childish, right? Like hide mistakes or lie or blame other people, right? Or try to like steal, right? Because that work hasn't been done to really resolve some of those old behaviors.
Yeah. Deep stuff, but true.
Mhm.
Yeah. So, and I think you may have already answered this, but you had talked about if it's hysterical, it's historical. Again, I'm repeating it, but I think it bears repeating because this conversation may be new to some listeners that they've never heard that phrase before. So I'm going to ask the question again: is how and why are we better for being able to go back and heal and reframe the past?
Yeah. So, I mean, the main thing is just choice, you know, the way the brain is wired, kind of another kind of quippy phrase is what fires together wires together. So if we are acting out the same patterns over and over again, relational patterns, work patterns, drug abuse, whatever it is, they literally neurons get wired together, and that pattern becomes more and more automatic and more part of what I would call, not psychoanalysis would call like the unconscious, right? It just happens, right? It just those patterns just fire. And part of going back, facing those demons, understanding those automatic patterns gives us choice. It gives us a little fork in the road, right? Where we can be like, okay, am I going to do this thing? Am I going to have that same anger outburst? Am I going to go home and drink a six pack? Am I going to like, close off to my wife again? Or kind of have some power and control here and try something new and try something different? And I found only by really understanding those habitual patterns can we start to break them. Because for many people, they're not aware of them. It's just normal, right? It's just unconscious. It's how things have always been.
Yeah, it's habitual.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. One of the things that you had mentioned is if they are willing to change little things in their environment, maybe it's an inspirational quote, something that even those tiny details can shift, their kind of their sphere of reference. It's
Yeah.
almost like an anchor to say, don't go back to the land of familiar.
I mean, I love creating interruption. I mean, that's why I like that retreat practice I talked about because it's totally novel environment. I think if people have the ability and privileges to go to travel and to travel to places that are very foreign in some ways, to meet new people, to just try to shake up their life whenever they can, especially when people feel like stuck in a rut. Being able to disconnect and create those interruptions is critical.
Yes, yes. So if you could have a microphone or a megaphone and blast one message to the world, what would it be?
Yeah, I mean, I think what was true in my work, you mentioned in our pre-conversation was like the house of cards. I find that to be really true. This idea that these things that we think are very intense and unchangeable, and it's the way I'm always going to be, and the way that everything always is going to be, and I'm always going to be alone forever, or I'm always going to be lonely or suffer, whatever, right? Whatever it is. Loneliness is a big thing I hear in my leaders, right? Oftentimes, if you can approach that and you can touch it, it falls apart like a house of cards. It's very intimidating from far away, but if you can work up the courage to like get up to it, look at it, examine it, it's way more fragile than you think it is. And those things that have been monolithic in your life can change.
That's powerful. So we don't have to be trapped in that world of the, you know, recycling a story if it's no longer working for us.
Like
Yeah,
almost everything is changeable. And of course there's some biological things that are not, but for the most part, everything is changeable. And if the thing is changeable, our stories around it are.
very cool. Very nice. Yes. Okay, good. What's the best way if a listener or a viewer wanted to reach out to you? How can they find you?
Yeah, so the best way is to check out the website. It's marc-azoulay.com, which is MARC dash or hyphen AZOULAY.com. I also have a podcast called From the Ashes that's available on everything, Apple, iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, everywhere. So those are probably the two best ways to get a hold of me.
Very cool. So before I close out with the paragraph that I read at the end, I just wanted to say thank you to you for speaking into these subjects. I think whether it's addiction, trauma, anxiety, there are people that are walking around and they're carrying a lot
Mm.
on the inside, in addition to their careers and trying to climb a corporate ladder or make it in this world, especially with changing industries. And like you had mentioned before, that there are nonprofits that aren't making their numbers, and not all of us are going to be working in cryptocurrency to be seeing triple digit returns. And so I think it's important that people develop their personal mission statements, because if they can't clear out all their demons, then their legacy is developed by default and accident, then rather than by proactive choice. So thank you for speaking into some of these heavier, deeper topics.
Yeah, I really appreciate you saying that. And I just want to underline what you said of like, if you don't do this work, your life will be defined by your trauma and your pain, not by your legacy, right? Not by what you want to give to the world. So thank you for highlighting that.
Very cool. Okay, well, I'm going to read the closing paragraph. Okay. Okay, so I'm Angelina Carleton, the hostess of the Design Your Legacy podcast, as well as the founder to Legacy Planning, a coaching and advisory firm based out of Beverly Hills, California, but international in those I coach. I hope to dive deep into subjects that can help a person define, develop, and execute their legacy and continue to scour the landscape for those who can be great resources to every aspect of your legacy. For many viewers, there can never be enough education and preparation for their personal legacy. Whether you find yourself with new wealth or generational wealth, may the content of this channel be an anchor in any storms ahead. We do our best to provide original content for your intellectual and emotional curiosity. So thank you so much for joining today. Please remember to like, subscribe, and share. And thank you, Marc, for your contribution.
Thank you.